Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the 59th edition of the Frankenstein Chat. And I'm delighted we've got Emma Ainsworth with us. Good morning, Emma.
Hello, Frank.
Hi. Well, it's great to have you here. And Stan, we've got you again.
Yeah, sorry, stuck with me. Although I don't know if this is a subtle hint.
Yeah. We're going to talk about sort of relationships, I think, on my what's caught my eye this week. But
well, there's been suggestions. I have to say that the Barry and Stan chat might be more productive.
Steady. I do the recording here, Stan. Anyway, welcome, Emma. For those who don't know who you are, and can you just explain what role you have and how you're involved in education?
Yeah, so my name is Emma Ainsworth. I am a principal business architect at the Co-op. So that means my job is all about kind of translating strategy into the building blocks you need to actually deliver it in reality. And I am chair of governors at a Co-op academy called Parklands, which is a primary school just up outside of Leeds. And yeah, it's fantastic.
You're also involved in InnovateHer as well, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah, I'm an ambassador for InnovateHer. I used to run our women's network at the Co-op, and I'm also a carer for a parent with a degenerative disease. So lots of things to juggle.
How long has your mother had that disease?
She diagnosed about 3.5 years ago, but probably had it for about 10 years.
Right. So how does that impact on your life?
It's a lot of additional stress. So I'm an only child. I'm only 30, so it's a lot to take on when you're quite young, and it means I have to do a lot to juggle work and everything else with caring. It's not as easy as, say, having a child. You don't have the structure to it. A lot of things can change at the last minute, but yeah, it's a lot to juggle. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
Well, Stan started to, I mean, you don't have your mother staying with you, but you have the care responsibilities which have come to you lately, haven't they?
She's my mother's in a care home now, but that's from Christmas, her living at home, managing her own affairs and everything, to a fall, to hospital, to as the doctor there said, we find sometimes with dementia you can go into hospital for something else and it's like a cliff edge.
Yeah.
So my mother's now in a second care home.
I'm so sorry. We've been really lucky. She's we put her in a care home for respite care for a fortnight. It went horrendously. So she is living at home with living carers. But finding a carer and finding the right place for them is tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, well, let's go on to what's caught your eye this week. We'll go to Stan first. Come on, Stan, what's caught your eye? Quite a lot been going on again.
Unlike me, when I saw the news item about the white working class boys particularly, but white working class children underachieving, unlike me, I thought I'd actually read what the report was. I don't normally do that. I went to a lovely little, on the DFE website, there's a lovely little briefing note with a couple of video clips. And what really caught my eye and caught my attention was the view that where children are failing in areas, and it did sort of say northeast and southwest, to be honest, we find more poor schools. And it just struck me that this is another one of those where the same data is being used to judge two things. One, it's disadvantaged children not doing well, but the same data is used to measure the school. So if the children aren't doing well, it's bound to be that Ofsted described the schools as poor. There's no way around that. And it really irks me when I know the work that schools do, particularly in disadvantaged areas, and do a fantastic job with the children there, just for somebody to say more poor schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wrote a submission for that. Henry Morrison from the Northern Powers Partnership was a witness at the committee, and our submission was all around long-term disadvantage, deemed those children who are eligible for pupil premium funding, who parents have been, who are eligible for pupil premium funding, but who have been on free school meals for a very long time.
Mm.
And actually this is about white working class. I looked at the report, you're right, but actually the 3 recommendations are all around free school meal white working class children.
Yeah,
There is a massive difference.
I wish they would stop calling it white working class,
I
call it
agree.
disadvantaged children,
Mm.
because the comparisons are made between different ethnic groups, and saying, but you know, Black Caribbean, so many percent,
Yeah.
you know, 50% reach the standard. Well, hang on, 50% still don't then.
Yes.
And so why aren't we looking at the disadvantage rather than trying to break it down further? Only because we've got some data. If we had data on brown eyes and blue eyes, I've no doubt we would be able to show that brown eyes are far, far more intelligent than blue eyes. Just might be biased.
I mean, Emma, there is an academy that the co-op run in central Leeds, which has a very large Czech Roma, Gypsy Roma population, and their performance, academic performance, is really poor. But actually, it's really interesting that the select committee have selected, you know, what deemed to be a white working class report, but actually, as if that was the worst performing, it's not. And actually, but politically, that Czech Roma issue, well, that's not going to shake much, is it? You know, but actually, we'll go for the white working class. You know, that's a good title. That'll get the headlines. You know, and I think that what frustrates me about that is that academy in central Leeds has done a fantastic job integrating those communities and working within them, but really they get very little credit for that. You know, nobody's really that interested.
It really frustrates me that, especially when they're coming up with all of these different articles and they're just sensationalizing things, they arbitrarily put people in different boxes, and there's so many different systems and complexities to every single child that it just feels completely ridiculous to me, because it's not representative of any of the kids. It's just trying to sensationalize what's going on to get people's attention and try and either, you know, get more funding or try and influence the way that we approach things, rather than actually helping any of the kids. Because it shouldn't matter what your background is. You should all get the education that you deserve and that you need. And how do we tailor that to what your specific needs are? It shouldn't just be, you know, where you live, what your postcode is, what your background is, what your ethnicity is. It's you as an individual. But we don't seem able to do that yet. And even in private schools, they don't focus it at that level.
Yeah, because I mean, I wasn't aware, but your parents pushed you really hard, didn't they, to get you a scholarship into a private school? I mean, yeah. How do you look back on that now?
I didn't know I got a scholarship as a kid. So I only found out a lot later. After my dad died, actually, and I was going through all the house paperwork. And went, oh, you know, so I was told from being probably about 7 that if you got an A, you got to stay in school. And I was naturally quite academic. I'm a massive nerd, so I loved learning. But I didn't realize that it wasn't just you get to stay in school because you've worked hard. It was physically, in order to continue with your scholarship, you need to get those grades. But it was, you know, it was a great education in the sense that I got really good grades. From a social aspect, I think it was less of a benefit. So I was surrounded by lots of very wealthy children, you know, a lot of footballers' kids, a lot of people who had a fundamentally different outlook on life than I ever would, and got a bit of cognitive dissonance if I'd be going home to a relatively working class family, but being surrounded by people who, you know, their first car could be a Lamborghini or a Range Rover. Right. And you were just kind of going, ooh. So I was really lucky, and I had some fantastic teachers, and I got to go off and have loads of opportunities that I wouldn't have necessarily had if I'd stayed in Salford. But it made me very kind of hyper aware of my own privilege and how that impacted me and other people around me. And also, I wouldn't recommend girls' schools for girls, as they're very, very cliquey, very, very bitchy environments. And if you're slightly different, which you're obviously going to be if you're, you know, completely different from a socioeconomic background, then it can be really tough.
My wife experienced that. She went to an all-girls school in Manchester, and I went to an all-boys school in Southend, and both of us came out from that experience determined that we were going to go for co-ed at all costs, you know, and that's exactly what our children have benefited from. And I think also I've been pleased that I had to travel 17 miles to get to that school. It was outside of the town and whatever. My wife had to travel probably about 7 miles to get to hers. But actually our kids have been able to stay within their local community and grow up with local kids. You know, I mean, they felt completely integrated into that.
That's lovely. I remember I'd get the bus at 7:45 every morning, and I'd get home at about 5:30, and then you do your homework and then you'd go to bed. But I never knew anybody that lived near me. So you didn't go out and play, you didn't socialize. I spent most of my childhood reading books, which was, fine at the time, but you look at it and you think, actually, that's really changed how you are as a person and what's important to you, because you've not had that social interaction.
Okay,
I was for a scholarship at a private school, but my parents couldn't. The scholarship covered the school fees, but not the transport to school, uniform, and things like that. And they decided they couldn't afford that anyway. So, although I'd undergone this horrendous day of tests at school as well, you did well, but no.
Mine was the same, and I didn't realize. I suppose you don't when you're a child, but you don't know what you don't know until somebody tells you, right? So we scrimped and saved on so many things, and I never knew why. I just thought we didn't have any of the money. I didn't realize that they were spending it on getting me to school or getting me my uniform, because it just wasn't talked about.
Yes.
But yeah, it's tough because they don't necessarily think of the impact of, if we pay for the education side, all of the other bits can really ostracize you if you don't get them right.
Yeah. So Emma, what's caught your eye this week?
So I saw an article on BBC News that was saying last year we had more deaths in the UK than we had births for the first time since 1976. And again, like Stan's, it was sensationalizing that, our fertility rate's gone down, and look at how much of an impact COVID has had, and now we're going to be an aging population. But it doesn't really talk about the fact that maybe, people just weren't choosing to have children within a global pandemic, or women had made the decision to not have children as early, or maybe they're not in the financial position to support children. It just seems to exacerbate into this huge problem. And I got really frustrated just thinking, my life, for one, has been completely on hold through COVID because we've had so many things to deal with. It might just be a blip. Let's just say it's a blip and get on with it.
Or it might be difficult to get pregnant if you can't actually meet people.
Also very true.
For 18 months. That's been the case. So I don't know. I mean, miracles happen, don't they?
No, I want to lead in on that because my what's caught my eye this week, and I have to say I'm not a great fan of The Sun, but actually they ran a story this morning with a photograph of a minister embracing their sort of advisor in a very close and intimate way. I said to my wife, well, obviously this minister's having an affair. She said, I don't think you can assume that. You can assume one thing, but actually, an embrace, or I said it's a bit more than an embrace, isn't it? But she said, no, well, who knows? But the issue is not so much around that image, but it does get to the heart of, the level of trust you have in the people that are leading you. And in education, we got to a position whereby, if you are a senior leader and line managing somebody, I was going to say beneath you, but I mean, you know what I mean, but line managing somebody in the organization, that actually, that you need to declare that and actually be very open about that. And actually that gets to a point where that needs to be managed out as well, so, and I think that for me, this is where I think the government have got themselves in a right mess over this, because it's virtually impossible, I think, for the Prime Minister to go to Matt Hancock today and say, really, you're going to have to stand down, because actually people will then say, well, hang on a minute, what have you been doing, Prime Minister? There may not have been a camera there, but I don't think, I suspect there's a number of stories running around. So in a way, this is about, this level of sort of appropriateness in terms of the relationship you have with the people that you manage, and actually being honest with the people that you are wedded to. Your family is really important. And I saw somebody say something like, and it wasn't somebody my age, but somebody said, this may sound a bit old-fashioned, but actually Matt Hancock, you shouldn't be doing this. And, you know, and what is this for your children and your family now? You know, when you had that embrace and that was captured, you know, what's that going to do to the people that I think you probably love, or at least I hope you love them? You know, what does that mean to them? So in education, I had a senior leadership role where I got a headship where the head teacher and the deputy were having an affair. They eventually married. And actually that the head teacher moved on to another role. It was just not sustainable. But actually that became very difficult for me to take that relationship forward with the deputy, because, and she was brilliant in, you know, in the end, she was the most loyal person I'd ever worked with and was a great foil for me. But actually, I think it's really important that we're very clear and open about all of this, and that there's a level of expectation that you will do the right thing. And I certainly think that my respect was low anyway for this particular minister. It's rock bottom now.
Yeah, I think there's a big piece for me around understanding the power dynamics involved in things like that, and the psychological safety or lack thereof that a person, especially in the more junior position, has, right? Because, you know, not to say that that individual does or doesn't want to do anything, but there's a huge amount of pressure and complexity within everything to do with that. That's just, it's really hard for people, especially privileged people, to understand what's actually at play and how it does impact the decisions that they make. And I totally agree. You need to have that trust. It needs to be really open and honest, and people need to be able to, even round them, to trust what's going on and who's in charge, and you know, that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, because I think the people that I've been led by, I've had the deepest respect for. That doesn't mean to say that their relationships have all been great, you know, they're long marriages or long relationships, you know, but the way that they manage that side of their life is structured in the way that they manage their business life as well. And in a way, I think they've managed to not, that you've been aware of what's been going on, but it's not central. It's never got in the way of them being seen to be able to do their job effectively. You know,
yeah.
I should declare at this point, should I, Frank, that I married my colleague in school.
Yeah, but I don't think you line managed her though, did you?
No, we didn't line manage it, and we'd already agreed that, as you know, as soon as we declared we were going to get married, that we would both apply for jobs out of the school, and whoever got the job first would move out of the school.
Right.
And of course, my wife got a job immediately.
Very keen to get away from you.
Well, I think she was a better prospect for schools than I was.
I mean, the issue around this is that I hadn't thought about that, Emma, the male-female dynamic of this, that actually, you know, that in a way we've spoken about the minister, but there's also the advisor as well. And it'd be interesting to see, you know, whether there are any sort of resignations or whether people lose their post because of this, and whether or not it's convenient for the minister, the male minister, to stay, and for the more junior female advisor to depart, you know. And even if the male minister leaves, you know, where does that leave that female advisor in all of this?
Yeah, and I suppose there's a big piece for me around respect as well. And irrespective of what someone's choosing to do in their personal life, can you still respect that individual for who they are, how they lead, the decisions that they make? And that's what the biggest thing that I would end up questioning.
Yeah, and I think, because I know some people will pick up
that, don't we? Because if you were really going to question that about somebody, we've got a prime minister who's got a scattered history of affairs, marriages, children, and yet everybody shrugs their shoulders and says, "Oh, but that's him."
Yeah. I think the thing is I want to be clear, because I know that some people will take little clips of these videos and use them to say something, but so that we can be absolutely clear to viewers, I think all of us are saying that there are breakdowns in relationships.
Completely.
You know, we understand that we're not sort of suggesting we're sort of right wing or left wing in terms of all of this, but it's the way in which you manage yourself in those positions.
Yeah, and I think the honesty with which you talk about it, and the maybe the emotion, you know, is it something meaningful for you, or have you made a conscious decision, or have you messed up? And if you've messed up, own it, and that's fine, but just how you deal with it is so important.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so in terms of broader issues now, I mean, Emma, you've taken on a role as a chair of governors, haven't you?
Yes.
Fairly recently, or certainly during the pandemic?
Probably last September. So it was your fault, as most things are. So I applied to be a governor and then got a tap on the shoulder saying, Emma, would you like to be chair of governors? And didn't really know what I was signing up to. But yeah, it's been really interesting. So Parklands has had a lot of challenges historically. They haven't really had a very stable governing body, so all of us were kind of new bar one person. So the past year then with COVID on top has been about how do we start to all learn about what we're meant to be doing and how we do it well, how do we prepare for things like Ofsted, which is absolutely terrifying, but how do we support the school in the right way with not just a new governing body but a new head teacher, a new deputy head, a lot of changes going on within the teaching staff as well. It was all kind of at once, and then hope that it goes okay.
So I mean, I'm interested in what that's brought to you in your business life, you know, your professional life, and whether or not that you thought, oh, there have actually been some big advantages that I've learned a lot about how to pull this together, and that's impacting positively or negatively on other aspects.
Yeah, I think chairing the meetings has been really fun for me. So I tend to be quite organised and I like to have structure to things, but having to constantly chivvy people has been a bit more than I expected. And it's made me kind of not take as much rubbish as I probably did historically, and maybe value myself and my own time a bit more. So I'm very clear with the rest of our LGB. We've got this amount of time to talk about this topic. I expect you to have read everything in advance. If you've got questions, let's ask them of Michelle before so that she's not, you know, put on the spot unnecessarily. And also let's make sure that we're having some really valuable conversations and that we're doing things that are in the interests of our children rather than just doing stuff for the sake of it. So I think I'm better at structuring things, which is great, but also just don't take nonsense anymore. Because I think the nature of a lot of, you know, corporate meetings are you have a meeting about a meeting about a meeting and just going, for God's sake, no. Like, well, either we discuss this thing and we get on with it, or if there's no decision made, then this is a pointless conversation.
Yeah.
And it's made me feel probably a bit more confident to challenge things in a way that I wouldn't do before. So I work within technology. There's not that many women within tech. There's not that many senior women. And the few that are quite senior, it's that whole, a lot of people have hired in their own image over a period of time. So they're very similar people. They have the same kind of background. They have the same kind of outlook. They will make the same judgments within a given decision. So yeah, it's made me realize just how important it is to have people that are different.
That's really interesting.
Differently.
Emma, I had a brilliant chair of governors who the governors didn't always read everything, which meant that the meeting went on for hours as people turned the pages and started picking points up. But he also used it to my advantage because he would say, what do you want out of this? What decision do you want? And I'd say, what? So he'd go to the meeting and he'd say, right, you've all had the papers. I assume you've all read them. Anybody not read them? And of course, nobody's going to put their hands up and say, I haven't read them. So he would then say, so have we any questions? If not, I propose we go ahead with what's been suggested. And of course, all those who hadn't read it didn't dare put their hands up to say it. And we got through, and it taught the governors a lesson. And he did that. And he also did, because the governing meetings used to go on till about 10 o'clock at night from about 7. And he also brought in that we don't discuss any new business after 9 o'clock. And at 9 o'clock, if we've not finished the business, we come back the following day. We never got to 9 o'clock after.
Really good. Yeah. To begin with, I was really nervous about how to chair the meeting. And the first meeting that I went to was similar I was just observing, and it was about 3 hours long, and I could read the virtual room and everybody just looked bored out of their skull.
Yeah.
And I said to them, you know, it's great to meet you all, even though it's virtually, and we've still never all met in person, thank you COVID, but can you let me know one thing that I could do to make this better for you? And one of the team emailed me and said, for God's sake, can you just make it less boring? And I was like, right, so my first challenge is I'm going to make this fun. So we've got a running joke that whenever we actually do get to meet in person, I've got to bring cake. We're going to have tea and we're going to have a proper chat and have some fun with it and try and bring some energy to it, because a lot of the topics, especially when you've got so many papers to read and you've had a work day and there's loads of stuff going on, people are just knackered. So how do we kind of bring that energy and make it a bit more exciting? So
I thought it was interesting, Susan's point last week about, she said that she had a meeting and actually there was an agenda, but actually there was a big issue in the school that they needed to spend loads of time on, and they just dumped the agenda and just chatted about the big issue. And actually I think that's really important, I think, to keep that sort of sight of what is important, rather than, oh, we've got to review this policy, or Ofsted will expect us to have done this. You know, I think just keeping the focus on what really matters to the school is really important.
I have to say, where I'm a governor, the head is brilliant at scheduling all these things that the governors have to do throughout the year. And so you know what's coming up, when it's coming, even though it's sort of said the governors need to approve this, he'll say, yeah, but that's in our September meeting, so that's when we'll do that. And plus we've got what we call an executive committee and a standards committee, two different committees, and by the time it comes to full governing body, virtually everything is done and dotted. It goes. It is very, very efficient, and that's the head doing it, not necessarily the governors doing it.
I'm going to have to pick your brain about that later. That sounds heavenly.
Can I just say, we've, believe it or not, that's 30 minutes, and we haven't quite finished. Because what I'd like to do, I don't know if you can hear, but my granddaughter's arrived. We're going away for the weekend for the first time with her, so it's really exciting. She's really excited, so I'm waiting for her to burst in any minute. But I'm interested, because I know that your academy has done some work as sort of like a primary sort of schools careers event.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, I know that secondary schools do this as sort of virtual work experiences happening all over the place at the moment. Was that driven by you, that desire to do that, or was it driven by the school? And how did you play a part in helping that work?
So it was a thing that Michelle and I talked about right at the beginning of me getting involved. So what are the things that are really important to us? And a big part of it was, how do we raise the aspirations of our students so that they know that they can go off and do anything that they want to do, and try and ignite a love of education through that. So I put her in touch with the right people within the Academy Trust to say, you know, what's the stuff that we've already got on offer that we can take advantage of. And our deputy head, called Charlotte, went off and created all of this amazing stuff for the Careers Week. So I've been there to support and said, well, how do I leverage our relationship with strategic partners through co-op? How do I get co-op staff there? How do we get a real mix of different people with different experiences to talk about the jobs that they do? And then Charlotte's been this amazing person going off and sorting it all out and making it happen. And really sadly, she had to self-isolate, so she couldn't be.
Oh, I didn't realise.
Yeah, it was rubbish. But it was all really good. And then what we're going to do off the back of that is continue to do things through the year. So just before you left us at the trust, I did the strategy for how do we develop tech skills and the ability to enter STEM careers across our academies. So we're looking at trialing a number of those different things within the school as well, because you know, I didn't know I wanted to be a business architect when I was a kid. I still am just making it up, to be fair. So a big bit for me is, how do we expose our kids to know that there's different things out there, and that it's not just about what grades you get, and it's a lot about the softer skills as well. And don't get me wrong, it's fantastic if we can get all of our kids to get the top grades, but I feel like the education that we give them at the moment is either you're good at this or you're bad at this, and there's no in between. So how do we create rounded individuals that are able to really succeed in the world rather than just in the kind of education system? So we're going to do a lot more in that space, and I'm prodding, shall we say, a lot of the technology leadership team to say there's more that we can be doing, and it's our responsibility to do it.
I did a lot of work with enterprise in 2 of my schools, and mini enterprise when it first came out, and talking about the world of work. But although it worked really well, what happened, as always happens, when other schools take on a version of it, my own children's school did mini enterprise and were selling the products, which happened to be a yogurt pot with some silver paper around it and some dead flowers stuck in the top for 50p. And I wanted to cry, because the whole point of enterprise is yes, you want the children to have a successful business experience, but you've also got to point out that if the product's no good, you fail. You have to have an element of failure in it. And it was just, of course, every parent buys their own child's 50.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work like that. You've got to work in a different way.
Yeah, I think there's such a big piece for me about preparing them for the real world. And I remember when I was little, and you got, at one point they started doing this, you got a badge for participating, even if you lost the race or whatever it was, and saying, well, that you're not going to get a pat on the head if you're really rubbish for the rest of your life. It's not a bad thing to fail at something.
Yes.
And now I think we're a lot more open to it, but trying to kind of get our children to be inspired to do different things, to be really creative, to be innovative. That's something that's really important, because I don't think it's necessarily existed a lot historically. Ours was very much, especially within a private school, you are trained to pass the exams, and you do exam after exam after exam after exam. So you're really good at exams. And has that got you anywhere else in life? Absolutely not. It's just meant you've got a piece of paper that said at one point I was really good at passing an exam. But it doesn't prepare you to have the conversations that you need to have to interact within a workplace or form relationships or do any of the stuff that you actually need to do. It just means you're really good at, learning things out of a book.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke to somebody from Siemens the other day, and she said they're quite open to looking at the broad range of skills that young people have. She said, we're actually quite interested in the Gobby year 11 child who's all right, hasn't got great exam results, because actually they tend to make fairly good salespeople for us. If we get them in and they've got something, they're a bit confident, they've got a presence in a group, that's what we're after, and most people may view that individual as, well, you haven't done that well in your exams, have you? But they ignore the fact that they've got a fantastic set of skills that a business is after.
I had 2 year 6 students who ran a bank account with the help of the bank. They had a checkbook. They were the signatures on the checkbook. The bank supported it, and that account was raised through industry work, through doing enterprise. But it also paid for coach trips, etc., out for other classes to go on. But this group in my class had the decision as to whether the money was spent or not, and I had teachers go into this panel to say, we want to do this. And the classic was one of them going, you could borrow 2 minibuses for that from the other school. You don't need our money for that. It was brilliant. I have to say, the teacher wasn't that impressed.
Okay, well, look, thank you so much for your time this morning, Emma. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a very easy chat. I'm sure Stan feels the same. Yeah. And we'd love to have you back, because I feel as though, I'd love to have a further discussion around women in tech and women leaders and all of that sort of stuff. So if I can twist your arm again to come back in a few weeks, it'd be great to finish that side of the discussion off as well. So thank you very much. And next week, I think we're going down the HR route, Stan. I think we've got Dave. Dave's on.
That'll be a very different conversation.
So we'll need to rein him in a little bit, I think. But anyway, so thank you everybody for watching, and thank you, Emma, for being our guest. And all being well, we'll see you all similar sort of time next week.